This is Robbie Dillmore from the Christian Car Guy and Kingdom Pursuit, where we hear how God takes your passion and uses it to build a kingdom. Your chosen Truth Network podcast is starting in just a few seconds. Enjoy it and share it. But most of all, thank you for listening and for choosing the Truth Podcast Network.
This is the Truth Network. Welcome to Truth Talk Live.
All right, let's talk.
The truth is, I can't hide it, I can't hold it no more.
A daily program powered by the Truth Network.
This is kind of a great thing, and I'll tell you why.
Where pop culture, current events, and theology all come together.
Speak
Your mind.
And now, here's today's Truth Talk Live host.
Welcome to Truth Talk Live. This is Peter Rosenberger, guest host today. Thank you for letting me come and join you. Robbie and Stu, I appreciate the invitation to do so. You want to be on the program, by the way, 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. If I sound a little raspy, I live in Montana, and we have fire season right now. We've got like 11 fires in Montana, so we got a lot of smoke in the air. Plus, if you watched the news yesterday, 90 miles south of us down at Yellowstone in Wyoming, we're just above that, and the Biscuit Basin blew up. I don't know if you saw that or not. And so all kinds of things going on out here in the West. Biscuit Basin is one of the big geysers at Yellowstone, one of those beautiful geysers that sometimes the tourists come out here and they want to try to touch the water. We call them Turons, moron tourists. And they come out here and want to. Somebody drove their SUV into one the other day. I don't know what that's about. And people want to pet the buffalo. We call them the fluffy cows, the high capacity assault cows. And they we go to Yellowstone periodically. I like to go in the wintertime more than I like in the summer because there's just less crowds. But that thing blew up, and I don't know if you guys knew this or not, but Yellowstone itself is basically a super caldera. And so there's always that concern of, is this thing going to go off at some point? And my wife, Gracie, and she is you got to get to know her. She's pretty funny, but she was talking about an exit safety plan in case the super caldera at Yellowstone blows up. And I said, baby, we're 90 miles away from this thing. It's like the equivalent of I don't know how many nuclear bombs. She said, well, we need to be going to the caves and so forth. I said, no, honey, I'm going to be sitting on the front porch saying, come on, Jesus, because there's nowhere else to go. And so if that goes off, it'll be here, there, or in the air. I'll see you somewhere. But thank you all for letting me be a part of the program today. I host a weekly radio program on this network for family caregivers. And I've been Gracie's caregiver now for 4 decades through quite a journey where she's had 80-plus surgeries and both of her legs amputated off from a horrific car accident she had many, many years ago. She lives with a lot of challenges. She's got a great sense of humor. She's funny, an amazing singer. And don't take my word for it. We just had the Republican National Convention 20 years ago. Gracie sang in Madison Square Garden. She opened up the second night of the Republican National Convention. She performed there, and that was kind of fun. I mean, I got to tell you, that was pretty surreal. We stayed there in New York, and they liked her so much that the White House asked her to stay and be on the platform with the president. We were supposed to go back we lived in Nashville at the time. We were supposed to go back to Nashville on that Wednesday after she performed on that Tuesday night, and she. We ended up staying and being a part of the president's speech on that evening. So if you look at the old magazine covers, this is really before social media started getting what it is. And so you have to look at actual magazine covers. But if you look at Newsweek and Time and so forth, there we are over Bush's left shoulder. And it was kind of surreal. Gracie wore her tennis shoes because the footing is so odd, and she didn't want to trip and fall. Dealing with all the stuff going on because you're downstage there at Madison Square Gardens, and we couldn't go back downstairs. Once you're up on the platform, you had to stay there for security reasons. And we, so you look at these pictures that Gracie's wearing sneakers, and she wears her legs uncovered. She has real robotic looking legs, and she wears them uncovered. But she's sitting there, and she's beautiful, just gorgeous woman. And she's wearing sneakers, and so it was kind of surreal. Then afterwards, Leanne Womack came out when the balloons were all falling. She said, "I hope you dance." She did her big song, "I Hope You Dance." Our kids went to school together in Nashville, and so Gracie and I were dancing to Leanne Womack singing "I Hope You Dance" while the balloons are falling in Madison Square Gardens, and it was kind of a pretty cool event, and it reminded me of that as we went through this convention last week, which was amazing to watch. But all that to say, I'm sorry I sound raspy. If the super caldera goes off and the air goes dead from here in Montana, I'll see you in glory. But in the meantime, there's a lot to cover today in the news. I've been trying to watch a little bit of Netanyahu's speech to Congress, which Vice President Harris evidently didn't feel was important enough to attend. And I got to tell you, I was a little bit disappointed. She held up a Ukrainian flag when Zelensky spoke, but when Netanyahu comes, our most important strategic Democrat partner in the Mideast, even if she doesn't subscribe to anything having to do with the biblical Israel or anything, just having a strategic Democrat partner who was their nation was brutally assaulted back on October 7th, and she didn't have the wherewithal to show up. What are your thoughts on that? And if you want to talk about that, it's 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. I think it sent a huge message, and you're watching the Palestinians, pro-Hamas and everything else out protesting in front of the Capitol, and they're doing all kinds of vile things. And Netanyahu, I'll give this quote here. He said, "Some of these protesters hold up signs proclaiming gays for Gaza. They might as well hold up signs saying chickens for KFC." He just said that in Congress. I thought, that's pretty direct. What you say? They're gays for Gaza. They might as well hold up signs saying chickens for KFC. And that's pretty much where the mental capacity is for a lot of these people. They're not thinking it through. They're just such vitriol hate for Israel. And we live in a world filled with such hate and such divisiveness. What are we going to do about it? What is our responsibility as believers? And how can we address this? And that's some things I'd like to unpack that a little bit in this program. So if you have some thoughts, I would certainly welcome you calling in, and we'll talk about it. I think that we as Christians have to ask ourselves, what do we believe? What do we believe it? And then what are the implications of that? Are we prepared to be salt and light? There was a strong indictment from somewhere on social media, I think it was on X, and there were some people that were grumbling because there were not there were some non-Christian values and people bringing in like a Sikh prayer and some more pro-choice leaning type things, or maybe a softer approach on abortion than the party has normally done. And this person who is in the evangelical pro-life community.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. This is Peter Rosenberger, guest hosting in today. And I apologize for going to the break with a mishap there. I told you we got fires and geysers. I got fires to the north of us, geysers to the south. Here I am stuck in the middle. And so we had a little bit of a connectivity problem. I have Starlink. We're way out in the middle of the Rockies in Montana. We live 10 miles from a paved road. It's amazing we're able to do this at all. Isn't this technology amazing? So I think thank you for your indulgence on that. And to set up what I wanted to talk about, you're seeing these things play out right in front of you of what's going on with our country. The vice president who is running for president chooses to not address or meet with the sitting president. Can't do it. The sitting vice president won't do it, to meet with our only Democratic ally in the Middle East, who suffered a horrendous attack on October 7th that was just horrific, and they won't do it. Now, what kind of message do you think that sends for this country and where we are, and what is our responsibility as Christians? How do we push back on that? What can we do? And as I was saying before we went to the break, this pro-life evangelical writer was admonishing Christians. They were really calling us out. If you're complaining about any of the secular influences on the Republican convention and the party platform and so forth, be quiet, because you abandon getting involved in order to build megachurches and live a comfortable life and sequester yourself. And I subscribe to this belief that we as Christians are to be involved. We don't make politics our primary goal, but we do make speaking salt and light to the earth. We are the salt of the earth. We're the light of the world through Christ. And if we don't say it, how are they going to hear it? It's not like the world is going to come up with their own understanding of this. These are misconceptions that are in our pop culture today, where people say, well, trust your heart. No, don't trust your heart. The Pope said the other day that people are basically good. No, they're not. They're not. Scripture doesn't agree with that. Scripture says that no man seeks after God. Scripture says the heart of man is exceedingly wicked. Don't trust your heart. Don't listen to your heart. Listen to his heart. Listen to Scripture. That's what anchors us. Our hearts need to be changed and give us a heart of flesh because we had a heart of stone. And if we don't communicate these things to this desperately wicked world, who's in line behind you to do it? That's a good question, and that's something I'd like to unpack today. And if you want to be a part of that conversation, 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. Tom in Toledo. Tom, welcome to the program. How are you feeling? Tom, how are you feeling? Tom, are you with us? Well, I guess Tom has backed out of this. Well, there we go. 866-348-7884. These are things that I want to be able to help us do as believers on what is our responsibility. How do we do this? Now, my show that I do every week on this program is for family caregivers. And in the realm that I live in, there's chronic suffering. There's chronic impairment. And so we speak to that. We speak to that with clarity. On my program and in my writings, my books, you can go if you want to see what I do, go to hopeforthecaregiver.com, hopeforthecaregiver.com if you want to see that. But the point is that crucible of suffering. Now, what we deal with is still the human condition, which is really messed up. We just happen to deal with it in my program from a caregiving standpoint, because when we look at suffering every day, I've watched a woman suffer for 40 years. Or almost 40 years now, and I see it every day, so I have to deal with these issues. But what happens is, as Christians, we have sequestered ourselves away from unpleasantness. We don't want to go into it. It's very uncomfortable to go into some of these things. So what are we going to do? Do we just sit on the sidelines and hope they all work it out? Or do we go deep into this? Are we willing to go elbows deep into people's ick? Are you willing to have a conversation with somebody who is pro-choice? Not to argue with them, but to talk with them, to see how did they get there, and be able to clearly communicate the gospel to them. Are you able to do this without speaking Christianese? Can you do this? If not, why not? Are you able to talk to somebody who is participating in a lifestyle that you think is anti-Scripture, or Scripture thinks is anti-Scripture? Doesn't really matter what we think. It matters what Scripture thinks. Are you willing to have that conversation without speaking with a rehearsed Christianese, but from your own what did it say in Revelation? It said they overcame by the what? What did they overcome by? The blood of the Lamb and the word of their opinion? No, their testimony. In other words, your personal experience. And I'll never forget, I had I think I told you this the last time, I had this lady call into the program. I used to do I go over to the caregiver keyboard and do Name That Tune, and I was playing this tune. Y'all know that tune? And she was, I hope I didn't have too much echo there. Dick will fuss at me. I'll come over here to the... You know that tune, don't you? He touched me. Well, this lady called in. She knew the tune. She loved the tune, and she was telling me about it. I said, tell me why this tune is important to you. And she said, well, I used to be one way. I ain't that way no more. And I said, we got a winner. Ding, 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 we got a winner. I used to be one way. I ain't that way no more. And I love that answer because that is the crux of the gospel, that we used to be one way. We're not that way anymore. He's redeemed us. He's regenerated us. And are we able to communicate that to people? When people look at you, do they hear a canned speech of Christianese? Or do they see the transformative work of the gospel in your life? I will tell you this about my wife. And again, go out to my website and you see pictures of her and you can hear her sing. She's got a great duet that she did with Russ Taff of a Twyla Pear song called The Joy of the Lord. And here's my wife standing on two prosthetic legs. Here's Russ Taff. And if you haven't seen his movie, I Still Believe, or read his book of his struggles with alcoholism. And they're singing, The Joy of the Lord is my strength. And they're just wailing on it. And you can download that song, but she's standing in this broken body doing this. And when she walks into a room, particularly wearing those prosthetic legs, and that's what evidently the White House, when they saw her, they just were quite moved by this. There's such a confidence. There's such a presence because she's not what you think. She has had 86 surgeries, and yet she comes into the room and she's ready to have a good time. And she's in pain all the time. I know. I live with her. I take care of her. She's always in pain. Do people see your life? Do they see my life? And they see a transformative work of the gospel? If not, why not? Can we talk about that? It's Peter Rosenberger, Truth Talk Live. We'll be right back.
Truth Talk Live.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. I am Peter Rosenberger. Glad to have you with us. We're going to get to our phones here in just a bit, but I did ask someone to be on the program today. By the way, if you do want to call in, 866-348-7884, 866-34-TRUTH. I asked Jeff Keene to call in today. I've been talking about my wife's journey with amputation. We do a prosthetic limb ministry over in West Africa where we have trained and equipped workers there to build prosthetic limbs for their own people. It's called Standing with Hope. You can go out to standingwithhope.com and see more about it. But Jeff was a firefighter who had his own encounter with trauma and suffering and amputation, and I wanted him to tell his story. So Jeff, welcome to the program. You are the author of When the Other Boot Drops, which I think is a great title for a book with somebody missing a leg. Here. It's great. Now listen, you know, you've been an amputee for a long time, and I want you to tell your story.
Correct.
But you and I both know that part of just dealing with this is having a pretty good sense of humor. And
Absolutely.
If you don't, you're not going to make it because it's just too tough. But when you have a title called When the Other Boot Drops, that's pretty funny. So I like, you had me at your title, Jeff. So welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit what happened. Tell us your story.
Well, yeah, you know that when the other boot drops, that comes from the saying when the other shoe drops. And that's to define that, it means seemingly inevitable event, especially one not desirable. And of course, having a multi-ton, water-filled, gear-filled fire truck stop on your foot at a fire call is definitely one of those seemingly inevitable events that's undesirable. And that's what happened. I was only in the fire department for about a year in New York, the Freeport Fire Department on Long Island, and I had just completed my training, 300 hours of fire service training, and I was raring to go to help the community. And one misstep later at the call, and the truck stopped on my foot, crushing it. So now, of course, the amputation didn't happen right away. They tried to save it for about 3 weeks. But when they could not.
On that note, I had a guy that reached out to us. A friend of ours connected us to him. He had a trauma accident, and very much like so many others do, they try to save it. But it's inevitable, like you said. And how you said they tried to save it for about 3 weeks? Yeah,
it was. They sent me home even after about a week and a half for another week or so, 5 days, just to see how the body would heal itself, And of course, the reverse was happening, and it was becoming essentially gangrenous. And so the day after my 19th birthday, 1989, September 1989, they removed it. Now, they did give me an option at first. They said that they wanted to try to remove a muscle from my back to replace some of the missing tissue in the bottom of my foot. But I just didn't want them to touch any other part of my body. So that's I decided. That was a big decision at that age, but I had to decide for them to take my foot.
That, Jeff, that is a big decision. And, Gracie made that decision twice in her life to go ahead and take it because it was her decision to give them up. But they spent years trying to save her legs, and most of the surgeries she had were as a result of trying to save it or repair the damage for trying to save it.
Wow.
And she would tell you straight up, and I think you would agree, there are worse things than amputation. And
absolutely, and worse parts of your body to get amputated.
That's true. And what did as you dealt with the aftermath of trauma, and you got on to write about this, and you've gone on to have a powerful voice for this. What are some things about trauma that you want people to know after reading your book and spending some time with you? What would you like for them to understand about life, faith, God's provision, all those things?
Well, my story is definitely, triumph over torture, solace over suffering, conquest over confusion. And these are all the things that when someone goes through a traumatic event, be it physical or emotional, they find themselves dealing with on a daily basis. The torture, the suffering, the confusion, in so many different overlapping ways. And it's really, it's a grieving process. Being injured, permanently injured, for example, the loss of limb has been akin to that of losing a loved one. Now, of course, I'm not going to compare the loss of a digit or a foot to the loss of, a spouse or parent or child. That's probably far more. But it's
no, but I mean, you have to grieve it out. It's a permanent loss, and you have to grieve it out.
Correct.
We know that. Yeah, I agree with that.
But my story is that at the time I did not know Jesus. At the time I was not a saved person, and it took a lot of things in the healing process for me to look back on with hindsight and say, oh, now I see God's plan. Now I see what all of this, all the little pieces that fell into place to get me to where I am 34 years later, or 35 years later. So, we don't realize that when we're in the mix of the injury or the suffering or the healing, and we know the healing can take many, many years. There's no doubt about that. But honestly, more important than the physical healing was the spiritual healing, because once you let go of the blame, that's a very important piece of my book is the blame part. We want to blame ourselves. We want to blame someone else. We want to blame an object that was the cause, or someone's mismanagement or negligence. But that's hypocritical.
Well, sometimes people want to blame God.
Exactly, but I didn't know God, so I didn't blame God. You see, whereas if I had known God and my faith was possibly damaged, wavering, whatever at the time, maybe I would have blamed God. And of course, I feel blessed because now when I look back, I'm thankful that I didn't blame God. I never blamed God. Not that there's any, not that that's not part of the grieving process. I'm not saying that, but just letting go of blame on all levels, because blame is a hypocritical behavior. As far as us Christians go, you want to focus on a gentler, more positive outlook. What can you do that will focus you on something more rewarding, rather than looking back at the pain and the blame and the hate? So
what was the process like for you to come to that acceptance?
Well, one of the most important things was one of the hardest parts of my story to write wasn't even about me. It was about the man who was driving the fire truck, the man who actually ran over an 18-year-old boy, and altered the course of his life forever. This man was a veteran firefighter, a multi-talented person, and he was going to quit firefighting altogether. And so, even though I didn't know what I was, because of this, and even though I didn't know what I was going to why I was doing this, I only look back now and say, God must have had his hand in this, because I forgave him. You hear about people forgiving a murderer for, killing somebody they loved, and you say, I could never do that. You overhear people saying, I could never do that. And I always tell people, particularly my high school students, that can only come from God. That kind of forgiveness can only come from God. And so that's where I believe that was the most important change for me, was being able to forgive somebody else, even though they thought it was their fault.
I talk about that a lot with forgiveness, because that's a big issue that so many caregivers and all face. Forgiveness doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It means that you're going to turn this over to the one who can deal with it best, and that is God. It is an act of faith. It's not saying it's okay, I forgive you, and just be kind of emotional and hallmarky about it. It means I am going to take an act of faith that in God's economy, in God's provision, in God's decrees, this will be handled by God, and I trust him with this.
Yes, and when you do that, you take off so much weight from your own healing process, and it becomes easier to move forward. Absolutely.
When people finish your book, and the book is called When the Other Boot Drops, and by the way, if you want to go out and see more about Jeff, you can go out to his website, Pegleg Penman. He's peglegpenman.com. Again, sometimes when you go through things like this, you end up developing a pretty weird sense of humor. I know. And peglegpenman.com. But when people finish this book, Jeff, in 10 seconds, what do you want them to know?
I just want them to know that they can triumph over their torture and solace over their suffering and gain conquest over their confusion through God. Yeah.
Great words. Jeff Keane, When the Other Boot Drops. This is Peter Rosenberger. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Truth Talk Live. This is Peter Rosenberger, your guest host today. Thank you for joining us. 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. And I was listening to some of the ads during the break there. I heard the one from Johnny Erickson Tata. And if I was talking about Gracie earlier, she and Johnny have done a couple of duets together that are just marvelous. And it was 57 years ago next week when Johnny was hurt. And she was 17 when she was hurt. She's been dealing with quadriplegia since 1967, since Lyndon Johnson was president. My wife was 17 when she got hurt, and she was during Reagan's first administration. So between the two of them, they've got almost 100 years of disability. And it's really quite stunning. And they did a fabulous duet of Andre Crouch's Through It All that is really worth hearing. And you can go out to peterrosenberger.com if you want to hear that, or go out and search it wherever you buy your music, and it'll be out there. So would want to go to the phones here. This is Elizabeth in Boiling Springs, South Carolina, Spartanburg County, upstate South Carolina. Elizabeth, ask me how I know about Spartanburg County.
Well, would I be being nosy if I'd ask you?
I'm from Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. Yes.
That's why that's why even though I live in Montana, I have a Southern accent. And,
okay.
and I eat grits and all manner of Southern food. And Elizabeth, I like mustard-based barbecue sauce, which is native to South Carolina.
Right.
Fried okra. I make a mean fried okra for my wife. She loves my fried okra.
Oh, yes. It's good.
So I do all that. But how are you feeling today, Elizabeth?
I'm doing okay. I'm 81.
Are you sure? 81?
I'm 81.
Well,
I'm
that is
retired. I retired
you could be president of the United States, Elizabeth.
Oh, no. No. I can pray for him, but not do it.
Well, tell me what's on your mind.
Well, I'm just so thankful that y'all have got the truth on now. I love it.
Well, I'm glad that you do, and I know that all the folks at the Truth Network are glad to hear that as well. And glad that you're in Spartanburg there listening, because that's a new addition to have it up in Greenville and Spartanburg. And we're glad to be down there and have that I think it covers pretty much the whole upstate.
Yeah, really?
I'll have to get the powers that be to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure it covers all the way from well over where you are. I think it goes over to even Gaffney, and then all the way over to Anderson and maybe even Walhalla. We won't mention Clemson. No, I'm just kidding. We'll mention Clemson. Well, you talked about you want to talk about your time as a caregiver. Who did you care for?
Anybody except one. I turned down one person in 30
Now you did this. This
years.
Was your job to do this?
Yes, I've done it for a living. God told me to do it, and He helped me through all of it.
Well, who did you turn down?
There was some people, I don't remember who all called. They wanted me to take care. Hold on a minute. Excuse me. They wanted me to take care of a baby that was born, a black baby, and its mother was on drugs, and they was having to give the baby drugs because it was in the baby.
Oh, they're having to do.
Take it. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. That's the only one I turned down.
They had to treat the baby for addiction.
Right.
I can understand how painful that would be, and yet it's unfortunately it's a product of this world we live in. And one of the things I've done, Elizabeth, is that I've helped people. Of course, I deal from a family caregiver standpoint where it's not our job. I was a music major. I'm a pianist by training, and
wow.
I call up my piano professor, still alive, and from Nashville. And every now and then I'll call him up and say, you didn't teach me all these things in piano school. They don't teach you how to change a dressing and argue with insurance companies and all the things that I do as a caregiver. And that's on-the-job training in the worst way. But I think I'm the only one with any kind of national platform for caregivers that introduced the concept of those who take care of those with addiction and alcoholism as caregivers, because they are. Because it's a chronic impairment.
If it had been an adult, I could have done it. But a baby, I just couldn't do it.
Well, I understand. Somebody's got to, and somebody has to. We not a lot of the things that we want to do, but it's got to be done. And I think that's the thing that I want to help equip people to do, is to be able to go into these things that are so horrific, but lean on Christ for it, and to really help them understand what does it mean to trust Christ as you do this, as you take care of something so heartbreaking, something so brutal. And we are not to shy away from these things. And I know that you had your decisions. You took care of a lot of other people, and I appreciate your reasons for that. But it's one of those things that I want to help equip others to be able to do this. And it's a tough thing to do, but if we don't do it, who's in line behind us to do it? And that's the
Well,
question I want to ask on this. And
we've got to have caregivers. We've got to.
well, I would concur. As somebody who's been doing it for 40 years, I would concur. So yes, but Elizabeth, I appreciate you calling and talking a little bit today. I'm glad that we're there in your area, that you can listen to this network, and I do appreciate very much you calling.
Yeah.
And look, do me a favor. It's peach season now in upstate, so you like to make some peach cobbler, don't you?
Yes, I just got some peaches yesterday at Ingles.
All right. Well, I can give you my address if you want to mail a peach cobbler to me, but I don't know if it'll last all the way to Montana from South Carolina. That's my favorite dessert, and the peaches from South Carolina are particularly good, and I know that. But Elizabeth, thank you so much for calling, and I appreciate you listening to this program. Appreciate you listening to this network, and you keep listening.
I'm
Okay.
to it every day. I'm going to stay with you every day.
Thank you so much. All right, let's go to Buxman in Dayton, Ohio. Buxman, it's good to talk to you again. We talked last week for briefly, and how are you feeling today, Buxman?
Hey, I got to share the gospel at work today, Peter. Made a man just absolutely thrilled, and I'm telling you, this is the way to live life, brother.
It is indeed, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. And you keep doing what you're doing, all right?
Will do. And I just want to chime in on your first part of the show there, Peter. I want to call out, I know you got a heart to get the truth out to people. That's what I love about Stu Epperson's networks here, especially this particular program. We got to talk to the pastors. Pastors, if you're worried about the 5013C status, please pray about it and know that as long as you don't endorse a candidate with your church's money, you're safe, or you as a pastor don't endorse a certain candidate as the pastor of your church, you're safe. So please get the truth out about what's going on in our culture to the men and women of God who's got the power of God.
The simple thing is, Buxman, is just to preach what Scripture says. And the candidate who is most aligned to Scripture, they let the people just preach the Bible. What does the Bible say?
Yeah.
And what does Scripture say? And if you've got a candidate who is rabidly pro-abortion, well, that's in direct competition with Scripture. So you're going to Scripture's going to tell you what to
bring that up
every time. You don't have to worry about who you're going to endorse. Endorse Scripture, and then let the chips fall where they may. Good words, Buckman. I got to go here, but good words, and thank you so much for calling.
I love you. Thanks for
you're a good man.
Have a good evening.
We'll see you, bud. Again, just what does it say? What do we believe, and what are the implications? And if you say that you believe in God, well, congratulations. According to James, you're qualified to be a demon. It's not enough to say I believe in God. The demons believe in God. Do you take him at his word? That's Genesis 15. Maybe one of the most significant encapsulations of this in all of Scripture, when Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness. Do you take God at his word? And if you do, what are the implications? How will that transform your life? How will that affect you going out and sharing with other people? How will that affect the way you vote? How will that affect the way you contact your political leaders? You talk with your pastors, you talk with the people at the grocery store, whatever. You don't have to go around just beating people over the head with it. What you do have to do is let your light so shine. This world with devils filled, as Martin Luther said, what are we going to do about it? And go out and look online today, right now, after this program is over, and look at the craziness in Washington, what they're doing, protesting out there with Netanyahu being in Congress. So take a look. There's our mission field, folks. This is what it's all about. And if we're not willing to go into the ick, into the brutal things of people's lives with the confidence of the gospel, we can go in and we can weep, we can agonize. We don't have to go in there and have some type of the 4 spiritual laws memorized and have this exegesis and all this kind of stuff. We go in there and just sit with people in their heartache. And, Job 2:13 is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. It said Job's friends sat with him quiet for 7 days. They didn't say a word because they saw his suffering was great. It's when they started talking, well, that's when the wheels came off. You know, preach the gospel. St. Augustine said, preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words. You know, do we do that with our lives? This is Peter Rosenberger. Thanks for giving me the time today. I appreciate you being with me. You can go out to my website, hopeforthecaregiver.com. I hope you will check it out, and you can see some of the things I've written. My podcast, it's free. You can sign up for it. We'll see you next time.
Another program powered by the Truth Network.